Emily Harrington was a 22-year-old elementary school teacher in Sumter County, Florida, where she taught at a small school. Emily was a kind and caring person, always going the extra mile for her students. Her classroom was filled with bright posters and educational toys, and she often stayed late, grading papers and preparing lessons. She was passionate about helping kids learn and wanted to make a difference in their lives. Despite her dedication, Emily struggled with the extraordinarily low salary of just $19,000 a year. It was tough to live on that income, especially with the rising cost of living. Rent, groceries, and even gas prices were high, and Emily found it hard to make ends meet. She dreamed of doing more for her students and herself, but the financial stress was overwhelming. To supplement her income, Emily turned to a sugar daddy arrangement. She sought out older, wealthy men who would provide her with financial support in exchange for companionship. This led her to the Villages, America's largest retirement community and a haven of sexual free expression, where she met Hal Davenport, a 68-year-old retired businessman. Hal was generous, often buying Emily expensive gifts and taking her out to nice restaurants. Emily saw this as a way to support herself while still pursuing her passion for teaching. Emily had a close relationship with her father, Robert Harrington, especially after her mother passed away. Robert was proud of his daughter and her accomplishments, but he worried about her living situation and the pressure she faced. He knew she was struggling but didn't know the full extent of it. Emily didn't share her sugar daddy arrangement with him, keeping it a secret to avoid upsetting him. In March 2022, Emily was focused on her work and future. She was preparing for the next school year and planning to attend a conference in Orlando to learn more about engaging her students in science. Emily dreamed of becoming a well-known educator, inspiring other teachers and students. But behind her positive outlook, she was dealing with the complexities of her sugar daddy arrangement, a secret that would soon have tragic consequences. On the morning of March 12, 2022, just before 7:30 a.m., Jasper Rivera, a maintenance worker at the U-Haul storage facility on County Road 466, just outside the Villages, Florida, started his routine checks. The sun had just risen, casting a pale light over the rows of orange and white storage units. As Jasper made his way down the aisles, he noticed something unusual near one of the storage units, a pile of what looked like discarded clothing. Curious, Jasper walked closer, but what he saw made him freeze in his tracks. It wasn't just a pile of clothes. It was a young woman's body, partially dressed and lying on the cold, rough ground. Her face was turned away, and she wasn't moving. Jasper's heart raced as he realized the seriousness of what he had found. He quickly pulled out his smartphone, his hands shaking, and dialed 911. When the operator answered, Jasper struggled to find the words to describe what he had just seen. "I found a body," he finally managed to say, his voice unsteady. The operator calmly asked him to stay on the line and provide details about the location while dispatching emergency services to the scene. Jasper followed her instructions, trying to stay calm, but the shock of what he had discovered was overwhelming. Within minutes, police officers from the Sumter County Sheriff's Office arrived at the U-Haul facility. By this time, a few early morning customers had arrived, some noticing the flashing lights of the patrol cars. The officers quickly cordoned off the area around the body with yellow crime scene tape, instructing curious onlookers to stay back. The victim was later identified as 22-year-old Emily Harrington, an elementary school teacher. Her body showed signs of blunt force trauma to the head, and there were dragged Devons on the ground, suggesting she had been moved to this location after her death. Emily was found wearing only her underwear, which raised immediate concerns about the circumstances leading to her death. Police noted the lack of blood at the scene, confirming the suspicion that Emily had been killed elsewhere. Jasper Rivera remained on the scene, visibly shaken but cooperative. He spoke to the officers about his discovery, still trying to process what he had found. The tragic scene marked the beginning of a complex and troubling investigation into Emily Harrington's untimely death. On March 12, 2022, shortly after the discovery of Emily Harrington's body at the U-Haul storage facility on County Road 466, the Sumter County Sheriff's Office launched a full-scale investigation. Detective Ashley Collins, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving difficult cases, arrived on the scene with her partner, Officer Devon Stevens. The two were known for their efficient teamwork, often handling complex cases in the rapidly growing community of the Villages. The scene at the U-Haul facility was grim. Emily's body lay on the ground, partially clothed, with clear signs of blunt force trauma to her head. The area was eerily quiet, with only the hum of early morning traffic in the distance. The police quickly cordoned off the area with yellow crime scene tape, keeping curious onlookers and reporters at bay. Detective Collins carefully examined the body, noting that there was no blood on the ground, confirming that Emily had likely been killed elsewhere, and then moved. Nearby security cameras were the first items on the detective's checklist. They'd hoped to catch a glimpse of who had brought Emily to this isolated location. Detective Collins directed Officer Stevens to collect the footage from the facility's office, which was equipped with several cameras covering the entrance and the rows of storage units. They would later review the footage at the station, looking for any suspicious vehicles or people who had been near the scene around the time of the murder. As they continued their investigation, the detectives noticed dragged Devons on the gravel near Emily's body, indicating that she had been pulled from a vehicle and left at the site. This was a crucial piece of evidence that suggested a deliberate attempt to hide the body, possibly to delay its discovery. Detective Collins instructed the forensic team to take detailed photos of the Devons and collect any fibers or debris that might have come from the suspect's clothing or vehicle. The forensic team, led by Dr. Grace Kwok, arrived shortly after to process the scene. They used advanced tools such as luminol to search for any hidden blood traces, even though the scene appeared clean. The lack of visible blood confirmed the detectives' theory that Emily had been killed elsewhere, making it crucial to identify where the initial crime took place. As the team worked, Detective Collins interviewed Jasper Rivera, the maintenance worker who had found the body. Jasper was still visibly shaken, but provided a clear and detailed account of his discovery. He described how he initially thought the body was just a pile of clothes until he got closer. His account helped the detectives establish a timeline and narrowed down when the body had been left at the facility. The investigation at the crime scene was methodical and thorough, but it left the detectives with more questions than answers. They knew the key to solving Emily's murder lay in finding out where she had been killed and who had the motive to end her life so violently. The first person of interest in the investigation was Harold Hall Davenport, a 68-year-old widower and retired businessman living in the Villages. Hall was well known in the community for his wealth and charm. Originally from Zanesville, Ohio, he had built a successful career in real estate and enjoyed a comfortable retirement in Florida's largest retirement community. Hall and Emily Harrington had met through an online arrangement where Emily sought financial support from older, wealthy men. Their relationship began with Hall providing Emily with money and gifts in exchange for sex and companionship. Over time, Hall became increasingly attached to Emily, viewing her as more than just a sugar daughter. His attachment soon turned into possessiveness, a trait that had caused problems in his past relationships. When police first interviewed Hal on March 13, 2022, the day after Emily's body was found, he appeared cooperative but nervous. Hal acknowledged his relationship with Emily, admitting he had last seen her 2 days before her death. He claimed they had spent the evening together at his home, where they watched old movies on Turner Classic Movies and had dinner from Outback Steakhouse, a favorite of Hall's. He insisted their relationship was strictly consensual and that he had no reason to harm her. Despite his initial calm demeanor, detectives noticed inconsistencies in Hall's story. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of Emily's death, Hall hesitated, stumbling over his words. He eventually provided an alibi stating he had been home alone. But the detectives found it suspicious that he couldn't provide any witnesses or details to back up his claim. His nervousness grew as the questioning continued, and he began to show signs of agitation, raising his voice when pressed about the nature of his relationship with Emily. The detectives also learned that Hall had a history of controlling behavior. His past relationships had ended badly, often due to his possessiveness. Police also discovered how his wife in Ohio supposedly committed suicide by driving her car into a lake just days after asking for a divorce. This information painted a picture of a man who could potentially act out of jealousy or fear of losing control. As the investigation progressed, Hall's name remained at the top of the suspect list. The police focused on gathering evidence that could either confirm or disprove his involvement in Emily's death. They obtained a warrant to search Hall's home, looking for any signs that he might have been involved in the crime. They searched for traces of blood, any of Emily's belongings, or anything that might link Hall to the murder. Hall Davenport's initial calm demeanor began to crack under the pressure of the investigation. But the detectives knew they needed more than just suspicion to build a solid case against him. The second person of interest in the investigation was Mike Andrews, a 21-year-old part-time server at Applebee's and a community college student in nearby Leesburg. Mike had been dating Emily Harrington for about a year, and although their relationship had its ups and downs, they were generally seen as a happy couple. Mike was outgoing, ambitious, and well liked by his peers, often dreaming of transferring to a four-year university to study business. Despite his youthful energy, Mike was also deeply protective of Emily, though he had no idea about her involvement with Hal Davenport, her sugar daddy. On March 14, 2022, 2 days after Emily's body was discovered, the police brought Mike in for questioning. When the detectives asked him about his relationship with Emily, Mike described her as caring, smart, and always supportive of his goals. He said they had been planning a weekend getaway to Orlando, where they hoped to visit Universal Studios. He seemed genuinely shocked when he learned of Emily's death, his voice trembling as he asked the detectives how something so terrible could have happened. However, when detectives asked Mike about Emily's recent behavior, he mentioned something that raised their suspicions. A few weeks before her death, Mike had tested positive for an STD, which he believed he had contracted from Emily. This revelation had caused tension between them, and although they had talked about it, Mike admitted that he was hurt and confused. He had confronted Emily, but she had reassured him that it was likely a misunderstanding, and they had tried to move past it. During the interrogation, Mike's emotions fluctuated between sadness and anger. He was clearly grieving the loss of Emily, but became defensive when the detectives asked if he had any idea about her financial struggles or other relationships. Mike insisted that he knew nothing about Emily's sugar daddy arrangement with Hal Davenport and stated that if he had known, he would have broken up with her. The detectives noted his frustration, but there was no clear evidence linking him to the murder. Mike also provided an alibi for the night of Emily's death, stating that he had been working a late shift at Applebee's, followed by a study session at home. The detectives verified his work schedule, confirming that he had indeed clocked out at 11 p.m. His alibi was further supported by a neighbor who saw him arrive home shortly after midnight. Although Mike had a possible motive due to the tension over the STD, his alibi and emotional response made it difficult for the detectives to pin him as the murderer. They kept him on their radar, but like with Hal Davenport, they knew they needed more concrete evidence before drawing any conclusions. The third person the police turned their attention to was Robert Harrington, Emily's 47-year-old father. Robert was a hardworking man who had raised Emily on his own after his wife passed away when Emily was just a teenager. He was known in the community as a devoted father who was proud of his daughter's accomplishments. However, the recent discovery of a positive pregnancy test in Emily's apartment, along with her sexual involvement with older men, had left him deeply worried and confused. On March 15, 2022, 3 days after Emily's body was found, Robert was brought in for questioning. The detectives knew he had been close to Emily and wanted to understand the nature of their relationship leading up to her death. Robert was visibly distraught during the interview, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He spoke lovingly about Emily, describing her as a bright, kind-hearted young woman who had always been dedicated to her students. He mentioned how she had dreamed of one day starting a family of her own, and how devastated he was that she would never have that chance. When the detectives asked Robert about the pregnancy test they found, he admitted that he had recently discovered it while visiting Emily's apartment. He had been shocked, unsure of how to approach the subject with his daughter. Robert explained that he had tried to reach out to her to discuss it, but Emily had seemed distant, brushing off his concerns. He had no idea who the father might be and was deeply troubled by the thought of Emily having sex with a much older man like Hal Davenport. Despite his clear distress, the detectives pressed Robert about his whereabouts on the night of Emily's death. Robert explained that he had been at home, watching TV and working on a project for his job as an electrician. He lived alone, and without anyone to corroborate his story, the detectives couldn't immediately verify his alibi. They noticed that Robert grew increasingly agitated during the questioning, his hands trembling as he tried to explain his concerns about Emily's recent behavior. Robert's love for his daughter was evident, but the detectives couldn't ignore the possibility that he might have acted out of anger or fear after discovering her secret life. They also considered the possibility that he had been upset about the pregnancy and the idea of Emily being sexually involved with multiple men. However, without concrete evidence, it was difficult to determine if Robert's emotional state had pushed him to commit a crime. The detectives remained cautious, recognizing that Robert's grief was genuine, but they kept him on their list of potential suspects. As with the other individuals they had interviewed, they needed more evidence to either rule him out or confirm their suspicions. Hey, true crime case solvers interested in more real-life murder mysteries, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Stay safe, true crime case solvers. On March 18, 2022, 5 days after Emily Harrington's body was found, a significant break in the case emerged. It was a warm afternoon in the Villages, with temperatures hovering around 75 degrees Fahrenheit, when Detective Ashley Collins received a call from the forensic lab. The team had finally analyzed the security footage from the U-Haul storage facility, along with additional evidence collected from the scene. The results revealed something the detectives hadn't anticipated: a partial license plate number from a vehicle that had entered the facility late on the night of March 11. The footage showed a dark-colored sedan pulling into the facility around 11:45 p.m., just hours before Emily's body was discovered. The car's movements were suspicious. It didn't park near any storage units and remained stationary for only a few minutes before quickly exiting the facility. The partial plate number, combined with the vehicle's make and model, a gray 2004 Honda Civic, gave the detectives a crucial lead. Detective Collins and Officer Devin Stevens immediately set to work cross-referencing the information with the Department of Motor Vehicles database. The search led them to an unexpected match: a car registered to Hull, Devonport. This discovery added new weight to the growing suspicions around Hull, who had been cooperative yet evasive during his previous interviews. The detectives knew this evidence could be the key to linking Hull directly to the crime. With this new information, the detectives obtained a warrant to search Hull Devonport's home and car. On the morning of March 19, 2022, a team of officers arrived at Hull's residence in the Villages. The search was thorough, with detectives combing through Hull's personal belongings, electronic devices, and the dark-colored sedan parked in his driveway. Inside the car, they found fibers matching the fabric of the clothing Emily was last seen wearing, as well as traces of soil that matched the area near the U-Haul facility. The detectives realized they were closing in on the truth. The combination of the forensic evidence, the security footage, and Hull's erratic behavior pointed to him as the prime suspect. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, and the investigation was rapidly approaching its conclusion. On the morning of March 20, 2022, the Sumter County Sheriff's Office made a decisive move. Armed with the evidence they had gathered, Detectives Ashley Collins and Devin Stevens approached Hull Devonport's home in the Villages. It was a quiet Sunday, with many residents enjoying breakfast at local spots like Perkins and Culver's or taking morning strolls along the golf courses. But for Hal, this day would be anything but ordinary. The detectives knocked on Hall's door, their presence signaling the end of the investigation. When Hal opened the door, he looked surprised but not entirely shocked. Over the past few days, the pressure had been mounting, and it seemed he had sensed this moment was coming. Detective Collins informed Hal that they had enough evidence to place him under arrest for the murder of Emily Harrington. Hal's face paled, and he slumped into a chair, muttering that it had all been a mistake. He confessed that on the night of March 11, he had gone to confront Emily after misinterpreting the document titled PBFILE Kids on her computer. His severe dyslexia had led him to believe it meant she was abusing children, and, in a fit of rage and confusion, he had struck Emily with a heavy object. Hal explained that he had never meant to kill Emily, but when she fell to the floor unconscious, he panicked. In his frantic state, he decided to move her body, hoping to delay its discovery and buy himself some time to figure out what to do next. He had driven to the U-Haul storage facility in the middle of the night, hoping the isolated location would conceal her body long enough for him to come up with a plan. As the detectives placed Hal in handcuffs, his demeanor shifted from one of shock to resignation. He offered no resistance, quietly cooperating as they led him to the patrol car. The neighborhood, known for its laissez-faire sexual atmosphere and retirees, was now buzzing with the news of the arrest. Neighbors watched from their windows, some in disbelief that the kindly old man they knew could be capable of such a crime. Emily's family was notified of the arrest later that day. Her father, Robert Harrington, was devastated but relieved that the person responsible for his daughter's death had been caught. He struggled to comprehend how a man who had seemed so generous and caring could have done something so terrible. The arrest of Hull Devonport marked a critical turning point in the case, bringing a sense of closure to a community shaken by the tragedy. However, it also left lingering questions about the complexities of Hull's mind and the tragic misunderstanding that had led to Emily's death. The trial of Hull Devonport began on April 15, 2022. The Sumter County Courthouse, a modern building located in the heart of the Villages. The courtroom was filled with local residents, many of whom had followed the case closely through news reports on WFTV and other local stations. The atmosphere was tense, with a mix of curiosity and sorrow hanging in the air. The prosecution, led by Assistant State Attorney Laura Reed, argued that Hal Davenport's actions were the result of a reckless and dangerous mindset. Reed, known for her firm but fair approach, laid out the case clearly. She presented evidence showing how Hal's dyslexia had led to a tragic misunderstanding, but emphasized that this did not excuse the violence. Reed described how Hal's confrontation with Emily had escalated into a deadly encounter, leading to her brutal death. She portrayed Emily as a dedicated teacher with a bright future ahead of her, contrasting this with the devastating end she met due to Hal's actions. In response, Hal's defense attorney, Morgan, took a different approach. Morgan, a well-respected defense lawyer known for his skillful arguments, argued that Hal's dyslexia had severely impaired his judgment. He presented evidence showing that Hal had genuinely misinterpreted the document on Emily's computer. According to Morgan, Hal's misreading had led him to believe Emily was involved in something sinister. The defense claimed that Hal's actions were not premeditated, but were instead the result of a momentary lapse in judgment driven by his frustration with his disability. Throughout the trial, Emily's family, including her father Robert Harrington, watched from the courtroom. They were visibly emotional, often seen holding hands or wiping away tears as the details of Emily's final moments were discussed. Their pain was palpable as they listened to the arguments being presented. After several days of testimony and closing arguments, the jury deliberated and reached a verdict on April 21, 2022. They found Hal Davenport guilty of manslaughter. The jury concluded that while Hal had not intended to kill Emily, his reckless actions had directly led to her death. This verdict was seen as a compromise between acknowledging Hal's severe misjudgment and recognizing the lack of premeditation. On April 28, 2022, Hal was sentenced to 36 months in prison. The sentencing drew mixed reactions. Some felt the sentence was too lenient given the grisly nature of the crime, while others believed it was appropriate given Hal's age and his severe dyslexia. Emily's family was disappointed with the outcome, but found some solace in the fact that justice had been served, even if it was not as harsh as they had hoped. The trial's conclusion marked a somber end to a tragic chapter for Emily's loved ones and the community of the Villages. After Hal Davenport was sentenced in April 2022, life slowly began to return to normal in the Villages, Florida. Emily's family faced a long and difficult road to healing. Her father, Robert Harrington, continued to live in the same home he had shared with Emily. The house was filled with memories of her, from photos on the walls to her belongings that still lingered. Robert, deeply affected by his daughter's death, sought counseling to help cope with his grief. He also became involved in local advocacy for victims' families, using his experience to support others going through similar tragedies. Hal Davenport, now serving his 36-month sentence, was housed in a state prison. At 68 years old, his life behind bars was challenging. The prison system, known for its strict security and routine, was a stark contrast to his previous comfortable life in the Villages. Hal's health deteriorated during his incarceration, and he struggled with the isolation and the harsh reality of prison life. His family, although supportive, found it difficult to reconcile the man they knew with the crime he had committed. As time went on, the Villages returned to its usual routines. However, the memory of Emily Harrington remained a poignant chapter in the community's history, reminding everyone of the fragile nature of life and the impact of one tragic event on many lives.